Beneath the floors of our most iconic buildings sleeps a forgotten world of intention. These foundations are not merely stone and mortar, but vessels for ancient, powerful secrets meant to stir the very soul of the earth. This journey will reveal 30 extraordinary objects deliberately buried to awaken, protect, or communicate with the land. You will discover the hidden logic behind rituals that span from prehistoric tombs to modern skyscrapers, uncovering a universal human desire to harmonize with the world below our feet. Why would a cat be sealed inside a wall forever? What message did the founders of a nation bury under their capital? The answers lie in the shadows of history, waiting for their stories to be told. What hidden guardian do you think watches over the ground you walk on today? This fundamental belief transforms a simple building project into a profound conversation. To wake the earth was to acknowledge its life force, a concept found across the globe. Ancient peoples did not see the ground as an inert resource, but as a great being, a mother goddess like Gaia in Greece or Pachamama in the Andes. A construction site, therefore, was not just a disruption of soil, it was an incision into a sacred body, an act that demanded permission and a reciprocal offering. The foundation deposit ritual served as that crucial offering, a gift meant to soothe the spirit of the place and invite its active participation in the human endeavor. A building anchored by such a ritual was not merely physically stable, it was spiritually alive, its success woven into the very energy of the location. The choice of object was never accidental. A coin might be offered for prosperity, a weapon for protection, or an animal for a life force sacrifice. Each item carried a specific intention, a coded message to the earth. Why do you think our ancestors felt such a deep need to communicate with the ground beneath them? Perhaps they understood something we have forgotten in our age of steel and concrete, that true stability comes not from dominating the land, but from forming a sacred pact with it. A clay tablet pressed into the wet mortar of a temple wall in Mesopotamia carried more than just the king's name. It was a permanent plea to the gods, a divine contract meant to outlast empires. This ancient act reveals a universal language of belief spoken by builders across the world. In China, the art of Feng Shui guided masters to bury special coins or inscribed talismans at precise points beneath a home. This was not mere superstition but a sophisticated system to channel the earth's own energy or Kai, ensuring health and prosperity for the inhabitants. The goal was harmony, a perfect balance between human ambition and the natural world's invisible currents. Meanwhile, across medieval Europe, the laying of a cornerstone was a moment of high ceremony. It was common to seal a living cat, a dog, or even a rooster within the foundations, a sobering sacrifice believed to transfer the creature's vitality into the stone, making the walls unshakable. From the pharaohs dedicating pyramids to the sun god Ra to the anonymous masons placing a worn-out shoe in a cottage wall, the impulse was identical. They all sought to transform a structure from a simple shelter into a consecrated space, blessed by forces greater than themselves. This deep-rooted human need to seek protection and invite fortune from the unseen world forms the very bedrock of our story. Now we can begin to unearth the specific, astonishing objects chosen for this sacred duty. These silent offerings might have remained hidden forever if not for the relentless march of progress. The story of their discovery is as compelling as the objects themselves, a tale of chance encounters and meticulous detective work. A construction crew demolishing an old factory floor for a new parking garage suddenly uncovers a glass bottle, stoppered and filled with rusted nails. A homeowner renovating a centuries-old cottage pulls up floorboards to find a single, well-worn child's shoe tucked into the hearthstone. These are the moments that bring history to light, not in a controlled dig, but in the dust and noise of the modern world. Each find is a fragile message from the past, and its true meaning depends entirely on the care with which it is retrieved. Archaeologists treat such a discovery with the utmost reverence. The exact position of the object is everything. Was it placed directly under the main support beam? Was it pointing north toward a sacred site? Were other items buried with it, creating a deliberate arrangement? They photograph and map the site with painstaking precision before the object is ever moved. This context is the first and most crucial clue. Once the artifact is safely in a laboratory, science takes over. Radiocarbon dating can analyze organic materials like leather or wood, pinpointing their age to within a few decades. Material analysis might reveal the specific quarry a stone came from or the unique alloy of a metal charm. For wooden structures or objects, dendrochronology studies the patterns of tree rings, matching them to known climate sequences to establish an exact year of felling. But science can only tell us when and what. To understand why, historians and folklorists must step in. They scour old building contracts, diaries, and religious texts for mentions of consecration rituals. They compare the find to similar traditions from neighboring regions. That cache of coins under the threshold is no longer just old money. Cross-referenced with a town's historical records, it might be linked to a specific ceremony performed by a long-forgotten guild of masons to bless the new inn and ensure its commercial success. This interdisciplinary approach, blending hard data with cultural interpretation, transforms a curious artifact into a credible story. It allows us to listen in on a conversation between the builders and their beliefs, a conversation meant to echo through the stone and wake the earth itself. With this method as our guide, we are ready to explore the first of these remarkable objects, beginning with one of the most personal and poignant finds. The most famous foundation in America holds a secret we may never fully see. Deep under the grand north portico of the White House, a cornerstone was laid with solemn ceremony on October 13, 1792. President George Washington himself, a dedicated Freemason, is believed to have presided over the event, marking the birth of a new nation's executive mansion. But this was no ordinary block of stone. According to the Masonic rituals that guided so many of the nation's founders, this cornerstone was almost certainly a vessel, a time capsule intended to awaken the earth upon which the federal city would rise. While the stone's exact contents remain locked away and unverified, historical records and Masonic practice paint a compelling picture. It likely contained a collection of coins minted in the 1790s, a brass plate inscribed with the date of the ceremony, and symbols of the Masonic order itself. These were not random choices. Each item was a deliberate ingredient in a symbolic recipe for stability. The coins represented the economic prosperity hoped for the young republic. The inscribed plate was a permanent record, a claim of ownership not just by men but by an idea, and the Masonic symbols invoked principles of reason, enlightenment, and fraternity, the very philosophical bedrock of the American experiment. This cornerstone deposit was a profound act of consecration. It was an attempt to transfer the abstract ideals of liberty and order into the physical ground, to literally build the nation upon them. The earth was not just dirt to be built upon, it was a participant to be awakened and aligned with a revolutionary purpose. The enduring mystery of what truly lies beneath that stone is a powerful testament to the founders' fusion of bold ambition and ancient belief. They were planting a seed in the soil, hoping the principles they sealed within it would grow as strong and enduring as the walls above. While the White House Cornerstone held grand ambitions for a nation, a far more personal and visceral form of protection was being buried in the homes of ordinary people across the Atlantic. Tucked beneath the hearthstones and sealed within the walls of 16th to 18th century English cottages, which bottles served as a desperate line of defense against invisible threats. These were not mere superstitious trinkets but carefully crafted counter-magical devices, born from a profound and tangible fear of witchcraft. The typical bottle, often made of stoneware or glass, contained a chilling recipe. It was filled with the homeowner's own urine, a potent link to their body, along with sharp iron nails, bent pins, strands of hair, and sometimes even a heart-shaped piece of cloth or felt. This was not a random collection of oddities. Each ingredient was chosen with symbolic purpose, creating a powerful trap based on the principles of sympathetic magic. The theory was both clever and brutal. If a witch sent a curse toward the household, the bottle would act as a decoy, drawing the malicious spirit into the liquid that represented the victim. Once inside, the spirit would be impaled and tormented by the sharp metal pins and nails, its own evil intent reflected back upon it. The heart-shaped cloth served as a surrogate for the witch's own heart, ensuring the counterattack struck its intended target. By burying this volatile object at the most vulnerable point of the home, often the threshold or the hearth, the occupants believed they were activating a spiritual landmine. They were not just hiding a bottle, they were waking a specific defensive energy within the earth, turning the very foundation of their home into an active guardian. The discovery of these bottles centuries later provides a hauntingly intimate glimpse into the domestic anxieties of the past. They speak of sleepless nights, unexplained illnesses, and dying livestock, all attributed to a neighbor's malevolent gaze. In an age without scientific explanation for misfortune, the witch bottle was a tangible action, a way for frightened people to reclaim a sense of control over their spiritual security. It was a dark pact with the ground beneath their feet, a plea for the earth to rise up and defend them. The desperate magic of the witch bottle fades into a far grander and more terrifying scale of sacrifice. Across the ocean, the Great Pyramids of Mesoamerica rise not from stone alone, but from a foundation of human life. For the Maya and the Aztecs, the act of building a temple was a cosmic event, an act of creation that demanded the most precious offering imaginable. The victims, often children chosen for their purity or captured warriors brimming with vitality, were not merely killed, they were consecrated, their lives given to feed the earth itself. This was the ultimate expression of the belief that to wake the earth, one must give it life. Archaeologists have uncovered these foundational sacrifices deep within structures like the Temple of the Feathered Serpent at Teotihuacan. A child interred with a rich array of jade beads, shells, and obsidian blades was not a secret burial. It was a public, ritualistic act meant to bind the temple's existence to the very cycle of life and death. The logic was profound and chilling. The earth was not an inert platform, it was a living, hungry deity. A new building, especially one reaching for the heavens, was a massive disruption. To compensate for this disturbance and to energize the structure, the builders offered a portion of the community's own life force. The blood of the sacrifice was seen as sacred water, nourishing the earth and sealing a pact between the human and divine realms. The temple, thus awakened, would stand not as a mute pile of stones, but as a throbbing heart of spiritual power, ensuring the sun would rise, the rains would come, and the cosmic order would remain intact. This practice represents the furthest extreme of the foundation deposit ritual, where the gift was no longer an object but a soul. It forces us to confront a difficult truth, that our ancestors' desire to connect with the land could manifest in ways that, to our modern sensibilities, are almost incomprehensible. Yet within their worldview, it was the highest form of reverence, a terrible necessity to maintain the balance of the world. A single worn-out shoe, tucked into the hollow of a chimney or wedged beneath a floorboard, connects us to a quieter, more domestic form of magic. While grand pyramids demanded blood, the common folk of Europe and North America, from the 14th to the early 20th century, employed a charm of last resort using the most personal of objects. Concealed shoes are among the most frequent and poignant foundation deposits ever discovered. They were not lost or discarded by accident. Homeowners deliberately hid them, often a child's tiny boot or a well-worn woman's leather shoe, in the most vulnerable parts of a building. The threshold of a door, the frame of a window, the mouth of a chimney, these were the liminal spaces where evil was thought to creep into the home. The choice of a shoe was profoundly intentional. In the worldview of folk magic, an item that was in close, prolonged contact with the body became saturated with the wearer's unique essence, their spirit imprint. A shoe molded by the heat, sweat, and shape of a person's foot was a powerful repository of this identity. The prevailing theory is that these concealed shoes acted as spiritual decoys. The idea was that a malevolent spirit drawn to the life force within the home would encounter the shoe first. The entity would become fascinated, even trapped by the powerful human scent and form lingering in the leather. It would obsess over this decoy, wasting its energy on the empty vessel instead of pursuing the living, breathing family inside. This was a way to wake a specific, protective energy within the very walls, using an everyday object to create a simple yet powerful ward. Why a worn-out shoe and not a new one? The magic was in the use. A new shoe held no essence, it had no connection to a life. It was the wear, the creases, the dirt from daily journeys that made it potent. The act of concealment was a quiet ritual, a desperate hope sealed into the structure of a home. Discovering one today is like finding a fingerprint from the past, an intimate plea for safety from a person whose name is lost to history. Each silent shoe is a testament to the universal fear of the unknown and the profound human desire to use whatever means available to build a circle of protection around those we love. For the Romans, even the heavens could be consecrated into a foundation. Their temple building was not merely an architectural feat but a precise religious science, and one of its most dramatic rituals began with a strike from the sky. If a lightning bolt scorched a patch of earth, Roman augurs did not see a random event. They interpreted it as a direct, undeniable message from Jupiter, the king of the gods. That specific location was now charged with divine power, a sacred hotspot chosen by the god himself. The ritual that followed was known as the Fulmin Kandera, the burying of the lightning. The site was meticulously examined for a piece of stone that had been vitrified by the immense heat, transformed into a glassy slag. This fragment was not debris, it was a physical piece of the god's wrath and energy, a holy relic of the sky. A deep, circular pit called a mundus was then dug at the very center of the chosen site. This was not a simple hole, it was a symbolic portal, a point of communication between the world of the gods above and the underworld of the spirits below. Into this ritual pit, the priests would carefully place the vitrified stone, but this powerful core was not left alone. It was surrounded by a suite of offerings meant to complete the sacred pact. The first fruits of the harvest, bundles of precious incense, and often a sacrificial animal were all added to the pit. This combination was a deliberate formula. The lightning stone provided the divine spark, the explosive energy of Jupiter. The offerings of food and life were meant to placate and nourish the chthonic, the earthly spirits of the ground, soothing the disruption of the construction. The entire ceremony was an act of alchemy. Its goal was to capture the volatile, dangerous power of the lightning strike and safely ground it, transforming it from a destructive force into a stable, generative one. By burying this potent mix, the Romans believed they were literally transferring the god's presence into the earth, awakening the site's latent sacred potential. The temple built upon such a foundation was not just a house for a god. It was a structure whose very stones were believed to pulse with a captured piece of the heavens, a permanent dwelling place forged by divine appointment. High atop a Japanese pagoda, the elegant metal spire known as the Soren does not merely scrape the sky, it contains a universe. This intricate finial is a sealed reliquary, and its placement is the final, sacred act in a ritual that begins deep underground. Within the hollow central pillar that runs the entire height of the structure, builders would deposit a collection of extraordinary objects. These were not random treasures but a carefully curated assembly, including miniature statues of Buddhist deities, polished bronze mirrors to reflect truth, and ceremonial swords to cut through ignorance. Most vital of all were the shari, the precious relics of the Buddha himself, which could be fragments of bone or crystallized ash believed to hold his enlightened essence. This act of sealing was a profound consecration. The pagoda was never intended to be just a building. With the relics placed inside its central axis, it was transformed into a stupa, a physical representation of the Buddha's own body, standing in eternal meditation upon the land. The ritual connected the structure to a cosmic blueprint. The foundation stone, buried deep in the earth, represented the Buddha's feet grounded in reality. The central pillar was his spine, and the reliquary in the Soren at the very peak was his enlightened mind touching the heavens. This created a complete circuit of spiritual energy. By placing the most sacred objects at the highest point, the builders were not simply honoring the sky. They were aiming to channel that enlightened consciousness downward through the central pillar and into the foundation, effectively awakening the earth from above. The goal was to infuse the entire geographical area with the Buddha's peace and wisdom, making the pagoda a stable beacon of compassion. It was a way to wake the earth not with a plea or a sacrifice, but by directly implanting a seed of enlightenment into the very soil, ensuring that the land itself would radiate tranquility for all beings. A cat's skeleton discovered beneath a medieval floorboard is far more than a tragic accident. This deliberate placement reveals a chillingly pragmatic form of protection, a life sealed away to guard the living. Throughout Europe, from the great halls of manors to the humble walls of cottages, builders performed this summer ritual. A live cat would be walled into a newly constructed space, often near a hearth, doorway, or within the foundations themselves. The creature's subsequent fate was not an unfortunate side effect. It was the entire point of the offering. In the folk beliefs of the time, a cat was a creature of two worlds. Its ability to see in the dark and its silent, predatory nature linked it to the unseen forces that moved through the night. A witch, it was thought, could command a cat as her familiar, but a cat sacrificed in this specific way could be turned against its own kind. The theory of sympathetic magic was at work once more. By trapping the cat within the very fabric of the building, its spirit would become bound to the location. This spirit, now a permanent resident, would use its innate supernatural senses to patrol the boundaries of the home. It would chase away malevolent spirits just as it would hunt mice, its ghostly presence creating a barrier that evil could not cross. The cat became a familiar not for a witch but for the house itself. This was not an act of cruelty in the modern sense, but one of desperate necessity. For people living in a world filled with perceived spiritual dangers, The sacrifice of one life was a calculated price for the eternal safety of a family. The silent skeleton found centuries later is the echo of that belief, a permanent guardian whose watch only ended when the walls finally came down. A single coin dropped into fresh mortar was a seed for an empire's future. Across the sprawling Byzantine Empire, from grand basilicas to remote frontier forts, builders sealed small hoards of currency into their foundations. This was not a secret savings account for hard times, but a public and pious act of consecration. The choice of coin was crucial. A coin minted with the stern visage of the emperor was more than currency. It was a portable piece of imperial authority. Burying such an image transferred that authority into the very ground, invoking the state's power to protect the walls rising above. Similarly, a coin stamped with a cross or a saint transformed the foundation into hallowed ground, inviting divine vigilance over the structure. The ritual was a double prayer, a plea for both heavenly grace and earthly stability. But the magic was also deeply practical. By planting current coinage into the earth, the builders were performing a powerful act of sympathetic magic. They were seeding the soil with the very essence of financial prosperity, hoping the building's economic life would grow as reliably as the coin's metal. The earth, thus awakened, would not merely support the building's weight, but would actively generate wealth and security for all who dwelt within. This practice linked the fate of a simple house or a mighty church directly to the fortunes of the empire itself, creating a sacred bond between mortar, money, and faith. A massive mound of shells might seem like an unlikely foundation for a sacred lodge, yet for many coastal Native American tribes, these ancient middens were the only conceivable base upon which to build. These were not simple trash heaps, but monumental archives of community life, built up over centuries from the shells of countless meals. Each layer represented a generation, a season of survival, a shared story of nourishment drawn from the sea. To construct a ceremonial house or a chief's dwelling atop such a mound was a profound act of continuity. It was not an invasion of the landscape, but a deep integration with it. The builders were not waking a dormant earth spirit with a new offering, but tapping into an energy that was already alive and vibrant from centuries of human presence. The Midden itself was a testament to a reciprocal relationship with the land and water, a physical manifestation of the people's history. By building upon it, the new structure was instantly grounded in that legacy. The walls rose not from sterile soil, but from the accumulated memory of the ancestors, their labor, their feasts, and their very lives. This practice transformed the concept of a foundation deposit. Instead of sealing a single object to awaken the earth, the entire foundation was the sacred object. The earth was already awake, pulsing with the spirit of the people, and the new building became a living extension of that spirit, ensuring that the community's connection to its past would forever support its future. The 19th century replaced whispered spells with printed type, trading folk magic for a new faith in progress. Victorian builders, armed with industrial confidence, began sealing a different kind of charm within their foundations. Their offering of choice was the formal time capsule, a deliberate collection of the present moment meant to awaken not the earth spirit, but the minds of future citizens. Laid within the cornerstones of town halls, libraries, and universities, these copper boxes held a curated snapshot of an era, a local newspaper headlining a technological marvel, a portrait of the reigning monarch, a set of coins freshly minted, and detailed architectural plans of the very building being erected. Each item was selected not for its magical properties, but for its power as a historical witness. This was a form of secular consecration. The ritual had evolved from appeasing ancient spirits to communicating with unborn generations. The act of burial was a profound statement of belief in the future, a conviction that the community and its values would endure. By planting this seed of memory in the ground, the Victorians were attempting to charge the earth with their legacy. They hoped that when the capsule was unearthed centuries later, the rediscovery of their achievements, their daily lives, and their ambitions would jolt the future into remembrance. It was a way to ensure that their walls would not just stand, but would continue to speak long after the builders were gone. This practice reveals a shift in what it meant to wake the earth. The goal was no longer to activate a supernatural guardian, but to implant a historical conscience into the very soil, creating a foundation that was as much an archive as it was a support. For the Egyptians, a temple was a machine for maintaining the universe. Its construction was not a simple architectural project, but a divine reenactment of the very first moment of creation. The foundation ceremony was the critical act that transformed a plot of land into a sacred microcosm, and it required a set of specific, symbolic objects to awaken the site's latent power. Archaeologists call these collections foundation deposits, and they were buried with meticulous precision at the temple's 4 cardinal corners and its spiritual heart, the center. This 5-point pattern was not arbitrary. It mirrored the Egyptian conception of the world, with the 4 pillars of the sky holding up the heavens and a central axis connecting the earthly realm to the divine. Into each pit went a carefully curated selection of offerings. There were faience plaques, beautiful tiles of glazed ceramic, each inscribed with the cartouche of the ruling pharaoh. His name was his essence, and by sealing it into the ground, he was eternally binding his authority and his duty to the gods to this holy place. Alongside these plaques, workers placed miniature models of the very tools used to build the temple, tiny copper chisels, adzes, and grain measures. This was a way to consecrate the act of building itself, offering the labor back to the gods. But the most potent items were often the smallest. They included pottery jars filled with offerings of food, wine, and sacred oils, sustenance for the deities who would now inhabit the temple. And most remarkably, there were the figurines. These could be small amulets representing gods like Ptah, the patron of craftsmen, or Bes, the protector of the household. In some deposits, archaeologists have even found the mummified remains of animals sacred to these gods, a tiny ibis for Thoth, or a cat for Bastet. Each object was a syllable in a silent, powerful incantation. By burying these symbols, the Egyptians were not just asking for a blessing, they were actively staking the temple to the cosmic order. They were plugging the structure into the divine circuitry of the universe, ensuring that the magic flowing through the gods would now also flow through the temple stones. The goal was nothing less than eternity. They were awakening the earth not for a generation, but for all time, creating a permanent anchor for Mat, the principle of cosmic balance, in a world they feared could otherwise slip back into chaos. The protective spirit of a cat was just one thread in a rich tapestry of animal magic woven into the walls of old Europe. From the great stone hearth of a farmhouse to the dark, earthen floor of a barn, other creatures were called upon to lend their unique strengths to a building's spiritual defenses. High in the rafters of a stable, a horse's skull might be carefully placed, its empty eye sockets gazing out over the livestock below. This was not a macabre trophy, but a vital charm. The horse, an animal of immense power and vitality, was believed to shield the beasts within from the invisible plagues that could sweep through a herd. Its spirit, bound to the building, would impart its own rugged health to the animals it now watched over. Meanwhile, beneath the main doorstep of a home, a different guardian might be interred. A dog, humanity's oldest companion, was buried to serve in death as it had in life. Its skeleton, positioned at the very threshold of the home, was thought to create a permanent ward. The dog's inherent loyalty and fierce protectiveness were transferred into the foundation, ensuring it would forever bark a silent warning at any malevolent force. whether a human thief or a wandering ghost attempting to cross into the family's sanctuary. These rituals reach back to a time when the world was seen as deeply alive, a belief system scholars call animism. Before churches dotted the landscape, people perceived a spirit, a conscious life force in every rock, stream, and creature. An animal was not merely a beast of burden or a pet, it was a being with its own potent soul. By sacrificing that animal and incorporating its body into a building, our ancestors believed they could capture and direct that spirit. The burial was a solemn pact. It was a way to harness the horse's strength or the dog's vigilance, waking those specific qualities within the earth so they would become a permanent, active part of the home's very structure. The foundation did not just rest on the ground, it was fused with the essence of these loyal protectors. A single clay tablet pressed by the hand of a pilgrim contains a universe of intention. Across the ancient kingdoms of Southeast Asia, from the plains of Thailand to the jungles of Burma, the foundations of Buddhist stupas and temples are layered with these small, sacred objects known as votive tablets. Often no larger than a coin, they were crafted from clay or metal and stamped with intricate images of the Buddha in meditation, compassionate bodhisattvas, or the elegant curves of sacred mantras. These were not unique works of art commissioned by kings, but rather mass-produced tokens of faith. Pilgrims would purchase them at holy sites as a tangible record of their devotion, a physical proof of their journey. But their final purpose was not to be kept. It was to be given away, to be returned to the earth. The act of depositing these tablets into the foundation of a religious monument was a profound form of merit-making. In Buddhist belief, merit is the positive karma accumulated through virtuous deeds, the spiritual currency that fuels progress toward enlightenment. By placing not one, but hundreds or even thousands of these sacred images into the ground, the community of devotees was performing a collective act of immense spiritual power. They were not simply burying objects, they were planting seeds of enlightenment. Each tiny Buddha image was a focus of concentrated sacred energy. Deposited together, they created a powerful magnetic field of merit, consecrating the earth and awakening its latent potential for wisdom and compassion. The stupa or temple built atop this foundation was thus transformed. It became more than a place of worship, it was a vast spiritual battery, a reservoir of collective good karma that charged the very ground it stood on. This reservoir was believed to radiate blessings, benefiting not only those who built it but all beings who would ever walk near it, even centuries later. The building itself became a living participant in the path to enlightenment, its stones silently broadcasting the accumulated merit of countless anonymous devotees. What does it mean to build not just for the present, but for the spiritual benefit of all future generations? This selfless act of consecration suggests an architecture of boundless compassion. The Norse ship burial was a final, epic voyage into the earth itself. For a Viking chieftain, death was not an end but a journey to another realm, and his ship was the only vessel worthy of such a passage. The ceremony was a spectacular act of consecration. His great longship, the very symbol of his power and mobility in life, was dragged ashore and lowered into a massive trench. It was not an empty coffin. The deck was laden with his worldly possessions, his weapons for the battles of the afterlife, his treasure to secure his status, and sometimes even the sacrificed bodies of his slaves or animals to serve him in the world to come. Once the chieftain was placed aboard, the ship was covered with a towering mound of soil and turf, creating an artificial hill that would dominate the landscape for centuries. This mound was far more than a grave. It was a sacred landmark, a permanent dwelling for a powerful ancestral spirit. The act of raising this hill was a deliberate ritual to wake the land, to transform an ordinary field or shoreline into a nexus of spiritual energy. The Norse believed that the veil between the world of the living and the dead was thinnest at such sites. The burial mound became a gateway, a place where the chieftain's spirit could still influence the fortunes of his descendants, where one could almost hear the echo of oars in the underworld. By sealing the ship in the earth, they were not burying a corpse, they were anchoring a soul to a specific place, ensuring that the chieftain's power would forever be a part of that soil, a guardian spirit awakened within the land he once ruled. A small metal box sealed inside a cornerstone holds more than objects, it holds an entire philosophy. Freemasonry, the fraternal order that grew from the guilds of medieval stonemasons, became one of the most prominent carriers of the Foundation deposit tradition into the 18th and 19th centuries. When a new courthouse, library, or capitol building was to be erected, a Masonic cornerstone laying ceremony was often the central event. This was not a secretive act, but a public spectacle of profound symbolism. At the heart of the ritual was the placement of a sealed box within a hollowed-out section of the foundational stone. The contents of this box were carefully chosen to represent the core Masonic values. There would be a list of the lodge members present, connecting the building to a living chain of brotherhood. Current coins of the realm were included, signifying the economic prosperity and civic virtue the building was meant to foster. Often, a copy of the nation's constitution or Declaration of Rights was placed inside, a bold statement that the laws of man were as sacred as any divine text. And then there were the tools, small, ceremonial versions of the stonemason's essential implements, like the trowel used to spread the mortar of brotherly love, or the plumb bob that symbolized moral uprightness. Each item was a physical metaphor. The goal was to construct society itself with the same care and precision as a well-built wall. This ritual was their method of waking the earth. They were not seeking to placate a fearful spirit, but to implant a seed of enlightened reason into the ground. By burying these symbols of geometry, order, and fraternity, they believed they were charging the foundation with these principles. The building would not just stand on soil, but on the bedrock of a moral and intellectual covenant. It was an attempt to make the very earth conscious of the ideals of the Enlightenment, ensuring that the structures above would inspire those who entered them for centuries to come. A clay pot buried beneath the floor of an African home was far more than a container. It was a carefully prepared spiritual engine. Across the continent, in countless traditions, the ritual of pot burials transformed a household into a sanctuary. These were not ordinary vessels for water or grain. They were specially consecrated by a spiritual practitioner, an nganga or a diviner, who knew the precise symbolic language required to speak to the unseen world. The pot itself was a microcosm, a miniature world filled with potent ingredients. It might hold powerful medicinal herbs known for their purifying properties, specific animal parts chosen for their symbolic strength, or perhaps carefully arranged stones and shells that represented the ancestors. Each component was a word in a silent prayer. Burying this charged vessel at a strategic point, like the main entrance to a compound or directly under the floor of the family hearth, was an act of profound intention. The pot became a conduit, a permanent point of contact where the concentrated power of its contents could merge with the latent energy of the earth. This fusion awakened specific forces within the land. If the goal was protection, the pot's energy would create an invisible barrier, repelling negative influences or malicious witchcraft. If the family sought fertility, the blend of herbs and symbols was designed to stimulate the generative powers of the earth, encouraging abundance for both the fields and the family line. And in many cases, the pot served as an altar to the ancestors, a dedicated channel through which their guiding spirits could be honored and invited to remain active participants in the home's well-being. This practice reflects a holistic world, you where the home is not separate from the land, but a living extension of it. By planting such a potent charm in the soil, the inhabitants were not just building a house, they were cultivating a relationship. They were asking the earth to become an active partner in their lives, a silent guardian whose awakened power would bless every footstep within those sacred walls. A prayer etched into soft lead could hold a curse as sharp as any blade. In the damp foundations of medieval castles and cathedrals, archaeologists have discovered these small, tightly rolled sheets of metal, known as depictions or cursed tablets. Far from simple notes, these were powerful instruments of will, designed to bend reality to the builder's intent. The choice of lead was crucial. This heavy, malleable metal was believed to be chthonic, connected to the underworld, making it the perfect conduit for a message meant to sink deep into the earth's consciousness. Once inscribed with words of power, often in reverse or cryptic scripts, the scroll was rolled, sometimes pierced with a nail, and sealed into the masonry. The act was a form of spiritual programming. A prayer inscribed on the lead might invoke a saint or an angel, asking for perpetual guardianship over the holy ground of a church. But just as often, the message was a malediction. For a castle keep, a lord might commission a tablet that called down ruin upon any enemy who laid siege to its walls, or upon any future generation that dared to alter his ancestral seat. This was magic of a particularly durable kind. The builders were not just asking for protection, they were installing a permanent sentry within the stone itself, a watchman whose sole purpose, born from words fused with metal, was to enforce a single command for all eternity. The earth, thus awakened, would remember the inscription long after the language was forgotten, its foundational energy tuned to a specific frequency of blessing or vengeance. While a lead curse tablet sought to command the earth, a buried mirror aimed to converse with it. Deep beneath the floors of traditional Chinese homes, a polished bronze disc was sometimes placed face down against the soil. This was no ordinary mirror, but a precise tool of Feng Shui, the ancient art of harmonizing human life with the invisible energies of the environment. Its purpose was not to see a reflection, but to manage one, to deflect a very specific kind of threat known as Shakai, or killing breath. This negative energy was not thought to come from spirits or ghosts, but from the Earth's own hidden anatomy. Underground water veins, subtle geological fractures, or even the lingering resonance of past conflicts could generate streams of Shakai, rising silently through the ground to poison the atmosphere of any building above. For the inhabitants, this invisible pollution could manifest as persistent illness, financial misfortune, or family discord, a slow decay with no apparent cause. The Feng Shui master's solution was elegant and proactive. By burying the mirror with its reflective surface facing the disturbance, they created a spiritual shield. The theory was that the harmful earth energy, upon striking the polished bronze, would be repelled and scattered, its malevolent focus broken before it could ever reach the living space. This was a sophisticated form of geomancy, a way to wake the earth not by offering a gift, but by healing a wound within it. The goal was to calm the land's disruptive energies, allowing the beneficial, life-giving force of positive Kai to flow unimpeded throughout the structure. In this practice, the building's foundation became an active filter, transforming a potentially hostile site into a sanctuary of balance. The buried mirror did not ask for protection. It enacted it, creating a silent, perpetual negotiation between the human world above and the dynamic world below. A family's most precious possession could become the soul of their home. In the rough-hewn log cabins and clapboard houses of colonial America, one object was considered so vital it was sometimes sealed away forever. A Bible carefully wrapped in cloth or oilskin might be placed within a hollowed-out foundation stone or tucked into the space behind the main hearth. This was not an act of forgetfulness, but a deliberate act of consecration. For these early settlers, the Bible was far more than a book of scripture. It was a physical vessel of divine authority, a tangible link to God in a vast and often unforgiving new world. By embedding it into the very structure of their dwelling, they were performing a powerful rite of sanctification. They were transforming their home from a mere shelter against the elements into a sacred space, a small outpost of God's kingdom on earth. The Word of God, resting directly upon the soil, was believed to awaken a holy vigilance within the land itself. This spiritual foundation was meant to repel evil influences, invite angelic guardianship, and ensure that faith would be the bedrock upon which the family's future was built. Yet this profound spiritual act was also deeply practical. A Bible was often one of the few, and certainly the most valuable, books a family owned. By hiding it within the walls, they were safeguarding their treasure from the very real threats of fire, theft, or decay. In a single gesture, they protected their earthly wealth and invested in their eternal security, ensuring that divine protection was literally built into the house, watching silently over every generation to come. 5,000 years ago, builders in Ireland orchestrated a sunrise. The Great Mound of Newgrange is more than a tomb. It is a precise astronomical instrument made of earth and stone. Its most ingenious feature is not found in the dark of its foundation, but in the light of its roof. A narrow opening, a slit known as the roof box, was constructed directly above the main entrance. This was not a vent or a simple window. It was a sacred aperture, a carefully calibrated channel designed for a single, spectacular event. For a few precious minutes at dawn on the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, a beam of sunlight would pierce this opening. It would travel down the long, dark passageway, growing ever brighter until it flooded the deepest inner chamber with golden light. In that moment, the darkness of the tomb was banished by the reborn sun. This alignment was the ultimate foundation ritual. The true offering was not a physical object, but the immense labor and profound knowledge required to capture a cosmic event. The builders were not merely placating an earth spirit, they were synchronizing the tomb with the universe itself. They were wiring the structure directly into the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. By channeling the first light of the returning sun into the heart of the earth, they performed the most powerful act of awakening imaginable. They were using the sun itself to wake the sleeping land from its winter slumber, ensuring that life would always triumph over darkness and that the ancestors resting within would be eternally bathed in the light of creation. A legend whispered for centuries claims that the mighty walls of the Ottoman Empire were bound by more than just lime and sand. The myth of the blood mortar, or canly hearse, suggests that for structures of supreme importance, a human life was the ultimate ingredient. This was not a random act of cruelty but a calculated offering, a sacrifice meant to transfer a soul's vitality into the stone, creating an unbreakable spiritual bond. The most enduring tale surrounds the Maiden's Tower in Istanbul. As the story goes, the Sultan, plagued by prophetic dreams of his beloved daughter's death by a snake bite, built the tower on an isolated rock to protect her. Yet a viper hidden in a basket of fruit fulfilled the prophecy, and in some versions her tragedy itself became the sacrifice that consecrated the site. Whether such events ever literally occurred is fiercely debated by historians, with little physical evidence to support the grisly accounts, but the power of the legend is undeniable. It reveals a profound truth about the human psyche facing monumental tasks. To build something meant to last forever, like a bridge that defies a raging river or a fortress that guards an empire. Our ancestors believed the earth demanded a price proportional to the ambition. The sacrifice, whether real or symbolic, was the ultimate gesture of respect, a life given to awaken the land's cooperation and ensure the structure's permanence. It was a dark echo of the belief that true creation is inseparable from sacrifice. Yet the ocean itself could be sealed within a temple's walls. For the civilizations of the ancient Andes, the most sacred offering was not mined from the earth, but harvested from the sea. The Spondylus shell, a thorny oyster that blooms in deep, warm waters, possessed a color of such intense, fiery orange that it was considered more precious than gold. This was no mere decoration. In the worldview of the Moche and later the Inca, the spondylus was a living piece of the ocean's soul. It was intrinsically linked to the deities of water, fertility, and, most critically, to the rain that nourished their crops in the arid coastal valleys and highland plains. The shell's arrival, often traded over vast distances from the warm waters off Ecuador, was an event in itself, a physical transport of life-giving magic. But its power was only fully released through a deliberate act of consecration. During the foundation ceremonies for a new temple or palace, priests would ritually break these magnificent shells. The act of breaking was not destruction but liberation. It released the shell's spiritual essence, its kame, allowing it to seep into the soil. By burying these fragments in the foundation pits, the builders were performing a profound act of sympathetic magic. They were implanting the generative power of the sea into the dry, waiting earth. Imagine the intention. In a land where a single season without rain could mean famine, they were not just asking for a blessing. They were attempting to wire the very structure of their most important buildings directly into the source of life itself. The temple, anchored by the essence of the ocean, would become a permanent prayer for abundance, a machine designed to pull moisture from the sky and fertility from the ground. It was a way to wake the parched land by giving it a taste of the sea from which all life ultimately came. A worn-out leather glove, a child's tiny bonnet, a man's felt hat crushed into the eaves, these silent shapes speak of a protection woven from cloth. Across the British Isles and Europe, the tradition of concealing garments within the fabric of a home extends far beyond the solitary shoe. These were not items lost to neglect, but deliberately chosen articles of clothing, often old, worn, and carefully placed in the most vulnerable parts of a building. The logic was deeply personal. Just as a shoe molds to a foot, a glove holds the shape of a hand, and a hat carries the scent and oils of its wearer's head. These everyday objects were believed to be saturated with the very essence, the unique spirit, of the person who used them. This made them incredibly potent tools in the unseen war against misfortune. A garment could serve as a decoy, much like the concealed shoe. The idea was that a malevolent spirit, drawn to the powerful human essence left in the fibers, would become fixated on the empty clothing, wasting its energy on the discarded shell rather than attacking the living person inside. But the magic of cloth could also work in reverse, acting as a trap for impurity rather than a lure for evil. During a time of serious illness, a piece of the sick person's clothing might be ritually walled up. The belief was that the sickness itself, the spiritual malaise or the fever's essence, would become trapped within the fibers as the garment was sealed away. This was a profound act of spiritual hygiene. By hiding the infected cloth, the family was not just disposing of a contaminated object, they were actively waking the earth's cleansing powers. They were asking the foundation of the home to absorb and neutralize the illness, to purify the household by drawing the corruption down into the soil and locking it away forever. Each concealed garment, therefore, represents a critical moment in a family's history, a birth, a sickness, a fear of the evil eye, a private ritual meant to weave a permanent thread of protection into the very walls that sheltered them. Long before paper or parchment, a king's word was made eternal in the humble density of clay. In the sun-baked cities of Mesopotamia, from Ur to Lagash, the most important foundations were laid with a written covenant. Rulers like Gudea of Lagash commissioned special clay cylinders or prisms, their surfaces carefully inscribed with the precise, wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform script. These were not meant for library shelves or public monuments. Once the text was complete, the cylinder was carried to the building site and solemnly sealed within the temple's foundation box, buried for all time. The words themselves were a powerful incantation. They began with a declaration of the king's piety, proving his worthiness to undertake such a holy task. They recounted the direct command from the city's patron god, a divine order to erect a dwelling worthy of the deity. And then came the teeth of the contract, a series of terrible curses aimed at any future ruler who might dare to deface the temple, erase the king's name, or claim the work as his own. These curses were not vague threats. They named specific gods of the underworld and destruction, calling upon them to afflict the violator with famine, barrenness, and a forgotten name. This cylinder was far more than a historical record. It was a legal and spiritual deed. By burying it in the earth, the king was making the very ground a witness to his sacred agreement with the divine. He was awakening the earth not just as a participant, but as the ultimate enforcer of this cosmic contract. The soil itself became the guardian of his legacy, charged with remembering his name and unleashing divine retribution upon anyone who broke the pact. It was an attempt to build a permanence for his reign as solid as the fired clay that held his words. Even the sleek glass and steel of a modern skyscraper rises from a ritual. The corporate groundbreaking ceremony, with its polished shovels and executive photo opportunities, appears to be a purely secular affair, a celebration of progress and profit. But look closer, and you will see the faint, unmistakable outline of an ancient tradition. When a company president places a sealed time capsule into the fresh concrete of a new headquarters, the gesture echoes the pharaohs dedicating a temple or the Freemasons blessing a courthouse. The contents have changed, of course. Instead of inscribed plaques and ceremonial tools, the capsule might hold a flash drive loaded with the company's strategic vision, a prototype of its latest smartphone, or a copy of its annual report. These are the sacred relics of the modern age, objects that represent the corporation's identity, its technological faith, and its financial aspirations. The ritual is a public declaration, a way of marking the land, of telling the world and the future that this spot is now claimed for a specific purpose. It is an attempt to wake the site not to a spiritual force but to a corporate destiny. The ground is being charged with the intention of innovation, productivity, and market dominance. In this secular consecration, the earth is still seen as a partner, though the language is one of branding and legacy rather than divine supplication. The company is planting its flag, hoping its values and its name will become as permanent as the foundation they are laid upon. Why does this practice feel so necessary, even in our age of data and dispassionate logic? Perhaps because the fundamental human need to mark a beginning, to connect our ambitions to the ground beneath us, is a force too deep to be erased by concrete alone. It is the enduring echo of a belief that a place must be awakened to its purpose, whether that purpose is to house a god or to launch the next global enterprise. A carved stone head gazes up from the dark soil, its features worn smooth by centuries of silence. For the Celtic peoples of Iron Age Europe, the human head was not just a physical vessel but the very container of the soul, a source of immense spiritual power that did not vanish with death. This belief, known as the cult of the head, transformed a simple carving into a potent foundation charm. At the boundaries of a territory, near a sacred spring, or placed deliberately within the earthworks of a hill fort, these stone or wooden heads were buried as permanent sentinels. The act was a deliberate invocation. By planting a symbolic head in the earth, the community was transferring a portion of that soul force into the land itself. They were not burying an object, they were implanting a consciousness. This guardian spirit, now fused with the soil, was believed to remain eternally vigilant, its watchful presence creating an invisible barrier against both human enemies and supernatural threats. The foundation of a home or a fort, thus awakened, became more than a physical barrier. It was a spiritual perimeter, patrolled by an unseen protector whose power was drawn from the most sacred part of the human form. Why place such emphasis on the head? It was the seat of reason, memory, and identity, the essence of a person. By capturing that essence in a carving and sealing it into the ground, the Celts sought to make the land itself intelligent, aware, and fiercely protective of its new charges. Each buried head was a plea and a command, asking the earth to remember the people who lived upon it and to rise in their defense. A single handful of clay can hold the weight of 1,000 prayers. In the high, thin air of the Himalayas, Tibetan Buddhist practitioners engage in a sacred craft, pressing soft clay into carved wooden molds to create tsatsars. These are not mere souvenirs, but miniature sacred architectures, tiny, perfect replicas of stupas or serene images of the Buddha himself. The creation of each one is a meditation, a physical act of devotion that imprints a prayer into the very substance of the earth. But their journey does not end when the clay dries. The true purpose of a tsatsar is to be given away, to be returned to the landscape in a profound act of generosity. They are carried to remote caves, placed inside the hollow interiors of large public stupas known as chortens, or carefully embedded within the wet mortar of a monastery's rising walls. This final placement is a critical step in the ritual. It is how these individual acts of faith are woven together into a collective tapestry of spiritual power. Imagine a monastery wall not as simple stone and plaster, but as a latticework of intention, each tiny clay Buddha a silent, focused point of devotion. The building's foundation and walls become a reservoir, charged with the cumulative energy of every prayer offered during the creation of those countless tsatsars. This process awakens the structure in a uniquely democratic way. It is not consecrated by a single grand ceremony performed by high lamas, but by the quiet, persistent devotion of an entire community. The monastery is transformed. It ceases to be just a building and becomes a living vessel for the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings. Its very walls are believed to radiate a calming, enlightened influence, benefiting every being who passes through its doors, whether they are a learned monk or a simple traveler seeking shelter. The earth in this tradition is awakened not by a solitary, powerful object, but by the gentle, relentless drip of countless droplets of merit, each tsatsar a single note in a silent, eternal hymn. A loyal dog buried alive beneath the altar became more than a sacrifice. It became the soul of the church itself. This was the essence of the Scandinavian and Northern English belief in the church grim, a spirit born from a stark foundation ritual. When a new church was to be consecrated, the community faced a terrible dilemma. Holy ground, while sacred, was also a magnet for darker forces, both human and supernatural. To create a permanent, vigilant guardian, the builders would inter a living animal, most often a completely black dog without a single white hair, beneath the foundation stone or directly under the church floor. The chosen creature's spirit would not be allowed to pass on to an afterlife. Instead, it would be bound to the site for eternity, transformed into the Kirkegrim. This spectral guardian was said to appear occasionally to the parishioners, sometimes as a shadowy dog, sometimes as a small, gray-haired man, but its true work was unseen. By night, it would patrol the churchyard, fiercely defending the graves from demons and witches who sought to defile the dead. It would also protect the church building itself from thieves, its ghostly presence ensuring that no one would dare steal the sacred silver or violate the sanctity of the space. This practice represents a fascinating fusion of ancient animistic beliefs with Christian doctrine. The community was, in effect, commissioning a permanent, supernatural watchman. They were waking a specific, protective energy from the earth by fusing it with the loyal and territorial spirit of a beloved animal. Why a dog? Its natural instincts for loyalty, vigilance, and protection made it the perfect candidate for this eternal duty. The grim necessity of the act was weighed against the perceived eternal safety it granted. The church grim was not a monster to be feared by the faithful, but a dedicated servant, a silent partner in the long watch over the souls of the community, its watchfulness sealed into the very soil upon which the congregation prayed. A lump of lead or a strangely shaped stone might be the final ingredient in a Renaissance mansion's secret recipe for success. As Europe emerged from the Middle Ages, a new intellectual hunger fused ancient magic with budding science, and this transformation was sealed into the very foundations of the wealthy and powerful. Alchemy was not merely primitive chemistry, it was a complete philosophical system, a spiritual quest to perfect base matter and, by extension, the human soul. An alchemist's ultimate goal was the great work, the creation of the philosopher's stone, a substance that could transmute lead into gold and grant immortality. For those who could not complete this elusive work, a symbolic version offered a tantalizing shortcut. By burying raw, unrefined materials like a piece of lead, a chunk of sulfur, or a sample of mercury deep within a building's foundation, they were performing a symbolic act of alchemy on the entire household. The foundation became their philosophical furnace, their athana. The base earth itself was the prima materia, the chaotic first substance awaiting transformation. The buried objects were the catalysts intended to slowly, magically transmute the property's fortune from metaphorical lead into gold. This was not a public ritual but a deeply private one, often commissioned by a patron with esoteric interests. An engraved copper plate with planetary symbols might be placed to attract celestial influences, or a cryptic diagram of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, could be hidden to symbolize eternal cycles of renewal within the home. The act was a profound expression of the Renaissance mindset, where the boundaries between laboratory experiment, magical operation, and architectural theory were beautifully blurred. Why simply build a house when you could actively enchant it, programming its very soil to generate wealth and wisdom for generations? This was the ultimate application of hidden knowledge, an attempt to wake the earth not just to life but to a state of perfected grace. A sleek metal box is lowered into a construction site, but it contains no coins or bones. It holds a hard drive. This is Object 30, the contemporary art intervention, where the ancient ritual of the foundation deposit is reimagined for a self-aware age. Today, artists deliberately create works to be entombed beneath new buildings, not as charms for protection or prosperity, but as conceptual seeds meant to provoke future thought. A sculptor might bury a minimalist form, a composer might seal a recording of ambient city sounds, or a digital artist might inter a time capsule filled with social media fragments. The intention is not to awaken the earth to supernatural forces, but to stir a different kind of consciousness. These artists are planting questions about history, memory, and the very ground we build upon. Their work asks what stories we are burying with our concrete and steel, and what legacy we are leaving for the archaeologists of the far future. This practice is a direct descendant of the traditions we have explored, yet its purpose is transformed. It continues the profound human need to mark a place with meaning, to say, "We were here." But instead of offering a gift to the earth spirit, the artist offers a puzzle to human consciousness. The act of burial becomes a philosophical gesture, a way to charge the land with the layered complexities of our present moment. Will a future generation understand the significance of a buried smartphone or the context of a political slogan sealed in acrylic? The magic here is not in summoning protection, but in sparking a dialogue across centuries. It is a quiet rebellion against the forgetfulness of progress, an attempt to ensure that even our most anonymous corporate landscapes retain a hidden soul of art and inquiry. In the end, whether the offering is a child's shoe or a digital poem, the impulse remains the same, a deep and enduring desire to wake the earth, to make it listen, and to ensure it remembers. These 30 rituals, from the pyramids to the skyscraper, speak a common language whispered into the soil. Across every continent and millennium, the same core human desires echo in the objects we choose to bury. The most immediate and visceral of these is the craving for protection. A witch bottle filled with bent pins, a dog buried beneath a threshold, a lead curse tablet rolled tight with malice. Each was a desperate attempt to build a spiritual fortress. Whether the perceived enemy was a vengeful spirit, a rival clan, or simply the cruel whims of fate, the foundation became the first line of defense, a shield awakened from the very earth. Yet defense alone is not enough for a community to thrive. Woven just as tightly into these rituals is the quest for prosperity and stability. A Byzantine coin sealed in a wall was a seed for wealth, a handful of Spondylus Shells a prayer for rain and abundance. These offerings were investments in a secure future, an attempt to program the land itself for growth and continuity. But what good is safety and wealth without a sense of belonging? This points to a third, deeper thread, the profound need for connection. A Tibetan tsatsa placed in a monastery wall connects an individual's devotion to a cosmic whole. A ship burial binds a chieftain's spirit to his ancestral land. A Native American lodge built upon a shell midden grounds a community in the literal layers of its own history. These acts are about relationship, about forging a sacred pact between people, their ancestors, their gods, and the ground they inhabit. Ultimately, every one of these deposits is an act of legacy. It is a message carved in clay, sealed in lead, or stamped on a coin, hurled into the future. The Mesopotamian king who buried a curse-laden cylinder, the Victorian citizens who placed a newspaper in a copper box, even the modern artist who interred a hard drive, all are saying the same thing. We were here, remember us. This universal impulse reveals something fundamental about us. To build is human, but to consecrate that building is to acknowledge our place in a vast, mysterious order. It is our enduring attempt to find meaning, to seek security, and to leave a whisper of our existence in the waking earth. From the witch bottles of England to the relic spires of Japan, the objects buried beneath our buildings are more than historical curiosities. They are windows into the human soul, reflecting a universal human story written in clay, metal, and bone. This story is not one of superstition, but of a deep and enduring search for security, purpose, and connection. For thousands of years, our ancestors looked at the ground beneath their feet and saw not a passive platform, but a living, breathing partner in existence. Their rituals were a language, a way of speaking to the land, of asking for its protection and promising their respect in return. The fear of malevolent spirits that inspired a concealed shoe was as real as our modern anxieties about economic stability or safety. The hope for prosperity that motivated a buried coin was as fervent as any business plan today. These acts were born from a fundamental need to impose meaning on a chaotic world, to build circles of safety in the vast unknown. Over centuries, the methods have transformed. The literal life force of a sacrifice gave way to the symbolic power of a saint's relic, which in turn evolved into the secular optimism of a time capsule filled with newspapers and coins. We no longer whisper spells into lead tablets, but we still lower polished boxes into concrete, hoping to send a message to the future. The vessel has changed, but the cargo remains remarkably consistent. It is always a piece of our identity, our values, and our deepest aspirations. The next time you enter an old library or even a new apartment building, pause for a moment. Consider the layers of history and intention that lie silent beneath the floor. The true strength of any structure may not be in its visible engineering, but in the invisible weight of hope and faith that was planted there at its beginning. What silent conversations with the earth have taken place on the ground where you live? What stories are waiting undiscovered just beneath the surface of your own world?